Hello and welcome to episode 11, subtitle, Will This Ever End? Well, the answer to that is yes, but not this episode. I'm over the hump. There's a stage in every project where you struggle to move forward, so I took some extra time and made sure I knew what I wanted to do before I did anything permanent. And now things are moving forward again. At the start of this project, I intended to trim the edges with gold T-moulding, mainly because I have a bunch of it left over from Project Terrycade. Follow the link to check that out. A lot of the details of this build I've worked out on the fly. This isn't an ideal way to build something. I prefer to plan ahead so I can make my mistakes without wasting time or materials. Having never built a pinball table before, I had little choice but to rely on my ability to fix mistakes as I went. And the biggest hurdle I've come across is how to make the edges of the Playfield glass look good. I hoped that the glass I purchased would be cut well enough that the edges wouldn't be a problem and I could just butt the glass against the sides and run T-mould along the slots. Well, that didn't work out as planned. The glass is rough along all the sides and thicker than the aluminium U-channel I'd bought for this purpose. Another thing I didn't know at the start were the aesthetics. I had no idea what I wanted the finished object to look like. As I've moved through the different stages of the build, the image I keep coming back to is something with a hint of vintage retro. I had intended to make the legs from solid oak, just like a proper 1950s era table, but that had to be discarded as the oak attached to the sides would kill the sound coming from the force feedback exciters. The lockdown bar is a large lump of solid oak and feels amazing under the hands. So could I do this with the edge trim too? And so this whole episode will be about the edge trim, and it's worth watching if you want something that looks a bit different and also pretty cool. And for the ghouls among you, yes, you know who you are, there are some juicy mistakes. My woodworking skills are what I would call keen beginner. I wasn't 100% confident I could join wooden strips all around the edges without making it look like firewood. But I'm learning all the time, and sometimes the crucible of a live project with a whole load of subscribers watching my mistakes can be a good place to learn quickly. We can pause here and watch me try to work out how to mark a 12-degree angle on the side of this piece of wood. For some reason my brain refused to wrap itself around this problem, and I just kept putting the angle finder the same way round, the wrong way, over and over. Eventually someone slammed a door somewhere and I worked out how to do it using a piece of wood with the correct angle already cut on it. Every angle on this cabinet that is not 90 degrees, from the slope of the playfield to the sides of the back box, is 12 degrees, or 78 degrees, it depends where you measure from. The point is, they're all the same. You can see the pencil lines on the top of this piece of side trim. That's where I intend to plane it down a little to bring it closer to the level of the lockdown bar. This is one thing I would change if I were to do this again. I'd make the lockdown bar sit slightly higher than the side trim. All of the edges of the trim are beveled with a block plane. This should prevent the very sharp corner of the wood from splintering. I can't get a good clamp on this, so I'm having to rely on painter's tape to clamp it. This is fine. I've seen expert carpenters do edge trim like this. Look up Rob Cosman if you don't believe me. The one thing I need to make sure of to keep the ends square and even and the sides straight is to keep the overhang even along the outside. The wood hangs over the inside slightly more than the outside. This is to give an impression that the sides are made of thicker wood than they really are. And we arrive at this episode's big mistake. This trim slipped down towards the front as I was putting pressure on the tape. I didn't notice until sometime later, probably 20 minutes. Cry of anguish. No. It won't budge. If it's dried enough, it will destroy the sidewall of the cabinet when I tear it off. Fortunately, it hadn't completely dried. I was very lucky this time. A 6-inch steel rule makes an excellent edge scraper. I use these more as scrapers than rulers. A quick scratch with some rough sandpaper to key the surface. As I replaced the trim, it tried to slide down again. I'm using a combination square to measure the amount of overhang. This isn't the best way to do this, and later I find a better way. After a quick test fit of the glass, which I forgot to record, I found it was very difficult to slide it into the slot. I took all the supporting pieces of ply out and trimmed just a small amount off each one. I also took the time to run a bevel along the edge. The glass is still quite tight. It turns out the supporting ply is not the issue. The problem is the glass is too wide. Again, badly cut. So I need to come up with another solution. And here it is. The best tools are the ones you make to fix a problem. This is a piece of wood around the thickness of the glass with a strip of sandpaper glued to it. I glued another bigger piece of wood to the back to act as a handle. Much better. A little fine tuning to make it perfect. And a test fit with the lockdown bar. Here I'm marking where the end of the trim on the back box will come to. When I cut all these pieces to length in advance, I cut one end with a 12-degree angle using my miter saw. This saved me from a few cuts, but it isn't perfect. It's a lot easier, but there's always a risk of splintering and tear out when using a power tool. Having now done this once, I think I would make all these cuts by hand in the future. It's far more satisfying and I can now make them very accurately by hand. Whoops. Well, that doesn't look right. Another small mistake, but only a little piece of wood was wasted. One thing I struggled with was shaving down the 12-degree cuts with my shooting board. I cut a piece of plywood to act as a guide, which helped. Once I managed to get the plane tuned into the cut required, it went really well. Before I can fix the side trim in place, I need to sort out the filling in the top of the back box. Although it will likely never be seen, it doesn't want to look a mess. Some wood filler along the rough edges. I also decided to quickly fill the slot along the top. It won't hurt and it will give a little more surface area for the glue. This section will also have the side pieces holding it in place, so it really doesn't need to be super sturdy. If you see my new website or follow me on Twitter, you might have heard me mention this is something I've done before. I've promised to give up my beloved crisps, chips for you other territories, chocolate and sweets and Pepsi for 150 days. For that, I've rewarded myself with this air compressor, which cost me £150. It arrived broken, but the supplier was really helpful and their customer service shipped out a replacement part in a couple of days. This will come in super handy in the future. I'll link it in the description. I'm already missing crisps though. Now I have the side pieces cut to length, I need to get them to match up on the joins. The top edge needs a clean up before I fit a piece of trim along it. I use my marking knife to mark the length of the cut. This is the most accurate way to do this. I put the end of the knife in the mark I made and move the square up to the knife. I then make a light score in the surface followed by a few deeper cuts. I then repeat this on the other side using the ends of the marks I've already scored. When you make the cut, you really should cut next to the line. It depends on how brave or foolish you are as to how close you try to cut. Then take that cut to the shooting board and trim it down to the marked line. And if you did all of this accurately, it should be a perfect fit. And it is. With the back box in place, I can start fixing the edges. Starting at the bottom with the two small sections. I check and check again for the fit to be right before I commit to gluing these. They took a lot of time and effort and I really don't want to do them again. Some tape to keep the glue off the oak and to also leave a small gap in the join. It doesn't need to be a perfect touching joint. This gives a clear view of the amount of overhang on each side. I discover that the rule in my small combination square is the exact thickness of the overhang. This makes getting this right much easier. I have something to clamp against with these ones. My medium F-clamps have swivel heads and will work on the longer sections too. A small piece of wood over the top to protect the trim. Check and check again. You can see there's no gap. Next, the longer pieces. I need to trim them down a bit. You may have seen this jig I made at the start of the episode. It allows me to plane these thin pieces of wood without needing to clamp them in a vise. I'm trying to get the two surfaces to meet neatly. Ah, we're back outside in the fresh air. No gust today, lazy old boy is asleep. The strip of oak across the top of the back box needs a 12-degree bevel to match the slope of the side pieces where they will meet. Awesome camera placement there. I also need an extra piece of wood to go across the bottom of the back box where the Playfield glass meets it. I need this to hide the end of the glass. I took an offcut from the same wood I've been using and cut a strip, and then put a 12-degree bevel along one edge. Boop. The ends of the top piece of trim are a little too high and need to be rebaited slightly. Using the side of the cabinet as a reference and a flush trim saw for maximum accuracy. Turns out it isn't that accurate, and I need to finesse it with a chisel. But that's okay, I'd rather this than take too much off. Getting a little overconfident in my chiseling abilities now. Oh dear. One small slip and the razor sharp chisel has sliced through the top part. Fortunately, it's so sharp it's only separated the wood fibres, nothing was lost. I finished trimming it and give it a splodge of glue and a painter's tape band-aid. When that is dry, you can't see any damage. Now this new bottom part. I need to cut it to length first. And square the ends. With my marking knife I score some marks where I need to cut the ends so it will slide in behind the side trim. It's time to glue some of these bits of wood on. Top one is pretty easy. That one just needs to be level with the ends of the side pieces. I can just clamp this one with painter's tape. The long side pieces will need clamping. My F-clamps will work well here as one side has a swivel base that allows for the slope. I only have 2 of these size clamps, so I do one in the evening and then wait until the next day to do the other side. And now a test fit to see if things all still go together. And they do. Eventually I'll fix this part so it sits just above the glass. I don't want the glass to hit it as that will damage the edge. Later on I'll come round and make all these corners neater so it all flows better. Right, let's put my last attempt at a back door behind us. Some bamboo skewers to fill the old holes. Very handy stuff, bamboo. Using an old electrician's hammer here. Some thin pine to edge trim the door and the frame where the door will hang. Screwing into the edge of MDF is a terrible idea. It will never be strong and the risk of splitting the board is very high. To get the pine to stick well to this MDF, I need to first remove the paint. That handy 6-inch rule again. The same treatment for the door. This is much too big, but rather than trim the final size piece, I trimmed it before cutting it to size. The pine is a little too wide. The base of the plane running along the board gives the plane a reference to keep it flat, and with only the edge of the plane blade running along the pine strip, it should make it perfectly even. These are the sort of cuts that are really simple and quick on my table saw, but it's fairly late at night and I don't think my neighbours would appreciate that right now. But this does show you don't need fancy tools to make straight cuts. Good old-fashioned hand tools can do the job just as well. Yeah, you forgot to take the backing tape off. That's not going to stick. Okay, well done. This straight edge will help guide the plane. Another benefit of using hand tools is greatly reduced dust. It's a great fit. It will need some further trimming to allow for paint reducing the clearance. These flush hinges are really easy to install. A small nick to mark where the hinges go. That's a good fit. It's not perfect, but it doesn't really need to be. The lock catch I'll install later should hold it in line. And that is the end of this episode. In the next episode, I'll be starting the paint. The real paint, as in the art paint. Thank you for watching this far, and kudos to you if you've watched every episode. Check out the description for all the social media and other links I can think of, and do the clicky click thing. See you next time. Bye.